I need a life that's moving forward.
Then go. Why are you in this meeting? Because you're bidding on my property.
The numbers don't match.
What happens now?
Federal review.
Ryan Robinson was 41, a quiet logistics operations manager in Columbus, Ohio. Most people believed life had simply passed him by. Riley certainly did. She had grown tired of the man who drove a 7-year-old Ford F-150, carried the same weathered leather briefcase every morning, packed his own lunch, and walked through the front door at exactly 5:30 every evening. What Riley didn't know was that Ryan had spent the last 7 years quietly building Atlas Industrial Systems into one of the Midwest's most powerful industrial technology companies. As she rolled her suitcase toward Preston Whitaker's waiting Bentley, Ryan's encrypted phone vibrated beside a confidential acquisition agreement worth $918 million, and his thumb stopped just above the final signature. If you're watching from somewhere in the world today, let me know where you're joining from and what your local time is right now. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. And if you love slow-burning stories where patience, truth, and quiet strength ultimately prevail, consider subscribing so you won't miss tomorrow's story. 6 months before Riley Robinson walked out of their home, with a single cream-colored suitcase, nothing about the house on Brookstone Drive looked broken. Every light worked. The lawn was trimmed every Saturday morning. The mortgage was paid automatically on the 1st of every month. The coffee maker started brewing at 6:10 every weekday before either of them woke. From the outside, it looked like the kind of marriage that would last another 30 years. Ryan knew appearances often lied. Every morning he left the driveway in the same dark blue Ford F-150. The truck had more than 160,000 miles on it, a cracked cup holder, and a dent above the rear wheel from an icy loading dock years earlier. He never bothered replacing it because it still ran perfectly. He believed useful things deserved to be kept. At 6:45, he parked behind Mid-Ohio Freight Solutions, a regional logistics company that coordinated warehouse inventory throughout Ohio, Indiana, and western Pennsylvania. To everyone there, Ryan was simply the operations manager. Dependable, quiet, always early. He walked the warehouse floor before anyone else arrived, checking loading schedules, greeting forklift operators by name, and helping new drivers understand delivery routes instead of ordering someone else to do it. He knew birthdays. He remembered whose daughter had just started college. He noticed when someone looked exhausted. People respected him, but very few imagined he possessed real influence beyond those warehouse walls. Ryan preferred it that way. At exactly noon, he opened the same insulated lunch bag Riley had bought him nearly 9 years earlier. Turkey sandwich, apple, bottle of water. Nothing changed. His coworkers joked that if the world ended, Ryan would still eat lunch at 12 o'clock. He smiled every time. He never corrected them. Across Columbus, Riley's days looked completely different. As Senior Marketing Director for Summit Commercial Development, she spent her afternoons inside polished conference rooms overlooking downtown. Luxury hotels, corporate receptions, networking dinners, ribbon-cutting ceremonies. Every event introduced her to another executive wearing an expensive watch and driving another imported luxury car. She had always been ambitious. Ryan admired that about her. But somewhere over the previous year, ambition had quietly begun transforming into comparison. She stopped talking about ideas. She started talking about lifestyles. At dinner one evening, she looked through photographs from a fundraising gala. Melissa and Eric just bought a lake house. Ryan nodded while seasoning grilled chicken. That's nice. They're younger than we are. They've done well. She waited. Ryan continued eating. You don't ever wonder if we should have more. Ryan looked toward her. What do you mean by more? She glanced around the kitchen. The bigger house. The nicer neighborhood. A different car. He smiled faintly. I like this neighborhood. She looked disappointed by the answer. Ryan noticed. He noticed everything. He simply chose not to argue about things people needed to discover for themselves. 2 weeks later, Riley attended the annual Columbus Commercial Growth Foundation Gala. Ryan declined the invitation. Large charity events had never interested him. He told her to enjoy herself. That night, for the first time, she met Preston Whitaker. He arrived nearly 40 minutes late. Valets hurried toward his black Bentley Flying Spur before it fully stopped. Photographers immediately recognized him. Several local television reporters approached for comments about his newest luxury development near the Scioto River. He smiled easily, answered every question, remembered everyone's name. Within minutes, people formed a circle around him. Preston possessed the effortless confidence that came from decades of public admiration. He understood attention. He enjoyed it. Riley found herself listening, then laughing, then staying beside him longer than she had intended. Their first conversation lasted only 12 minutes. He complimented her presentation, asked thoughtful questions, mentioned he admired ambitious people. Before leaving, he handed her a business card embossed in silver lettering. "Let's have coffee sometime." She hesitated, then accepted it. Ryan never saw the card. But he noticed something else. When Riley came home that evening, she hummed while removing her heels. She hadn't done that in months. He looked up from the financial report resting on his lap. "Good event." "It was." She smiled while pouring sparkling water. "A lot of interesting people." Ryan nodded. "I'm glad." She waited for another question. None came. Instead, Ryan returned to reading. Not because he wasn't curious, because curiosity and suspicion were not the same thing. He had learned years earlier that the trust could not survive constant interrogation. Over the following weeks, changes accumulated almost invisibly. Business dinners became more frequent. Phone calls moved onto the back patio. Weekend conferences appeared on Riley's calendar. Sometimes she smiled at messages before locking her screen. Ryan never asked who had sent them. Instead, he quietly observed patterns. Observation had saved him more than once in life. Every Tuesday evening, she arrived 45 minutes later than usual. Every Thursday, she changed clothes before leaving for client networking. Every Friday morning, she wore perfume she never used around him. None of those details proved anything. Together, they told a story. Ryan simply wasn't ready to finish reading it. Meanwhile, his own evenings remained remarkably ordinary. At precisely 8:30 p.m., after Riley went upstairs, his personal phone vibrated. Not the company-issued device from Mid-Ohio Freight Solutions. Another phone. Black, unmarked. No contacts displayed names, only encrypted identification numbers. He answered. "Good evening." Margaret Sullivan's calm voice came through. The revised trust agreements were finalized today. Ryan stood near the kitchen window. "Any issues?" "None. The signatures have been verified." "Good. We're also ready for the second acquisition whenever you authorize." Ryan glanced upstairs. A faint light glowed beneath the bedroom door. "Let's wait." "As you wish." The call lasted less than 2 minutes. When he returned upstairs, Riley barely looked away from her tablet. "Work?" "Yes." She shrugged. "I didn't know warehouse managers worked this late." Ryan smiled. Sometimes they do. It wasn't a lie. He still managed warehouse operations. It simply wasn't his only responsibility. The following Monday, another encrypted call arrived. This time, Benjamin Carter spoke. The board approved expansion into Michigan. Ryan answered quietly. "Excellent. The engineering team also wants your decision on the automation project. I'll review it tomorrow." No rush. After hanging up, Ryan locked the phone inside a small, fireproof safe hidden behind winter coats in the hallway closet. He never imagined Riley would look there. She never did. Instead, she had already begun imagining another future, One built with rooftop parties, private jets, luxury resorts, magazine covers. She interpreted Ryan's calm routine as lack of ambition. She mistook consistency for complacency. She confused privacy with insignificance. Ryan saw the growing distance. He simply refused to chase someone who was already walking away emotionally. One rainy Thursday evening, Riley returned home carrying a white envelope. She didn't remove her coat, didn't sit down, didn't ask about his day. Ryan looked up from repairing the loose hinge on a kitchen cabinet. "You just got home." "I know." She placed the envelope on the dining table between them. "I've already signed." The room became silent except for rain tapping against the windows. Ryan slowly wiped sawdust from his hands with a blue shop towel. Then he looked at the envelope. He already knew what was inside before he opened it. Divorce papers. He didn't reach for them immediately. Instead, he studied Riley's face. There was no anger, only certainty. That frightened him far more. "You've made your decision," he said quietly. She nodded once. "I have." Ryan lowered his eyes to the untouched envelope resting beneath the dining room light. Then, without another word, he gently pulled out a chair, sat down across from it, and placed both hands flat on the table before breaking the seal. Ryan did not open the envelope immediately. He simply rested one hand on the thick stack of papers while the rain continued tapping softly against the dining room windows. Across the table, Riley stood with her arms folded. She had rehearsed this conversation many times. He had not. After nearly a minute, Ryan finally slid the first page free. Petition for dissolution of marriage, Franklin County. Everything had already been prepared. There were highlighted tabs, colored signature stickers, every page organized with the precision of someone who wanted the process finished as efficiently as possible. Ryan slowly turned another page. His eyes never rushed. He had spent years reviewing contracts worth tens of millions of dollars. He knew emotions disappeared the moment signatures became legally binding. He read every line. Riley shifted her weight. "You don't have to read all of it." "I do. It's standard. Standard documents deserve careful reading, too." She looked away. That answer somehow frustrated her more than an argument would have. She wanted anger. She wanted questions. She wanted him to fight for the marriage she had already decided to leave. Instead, Ryan quietly continued reading. 23 minutes later, he placed the papers back into perfect alignment. "There are a few revisions." She blinked. "What?" Ryan pointed toward one paragraph. "The retirement account values were calculated before last quarter." He turned another page. "The property tax estimate on the house is outdated." Another page. "This vehicle identification number is missing one digit." Riley stared at him. "That's what you're focused on." Ryan met her eyes. "If we're ending a marriage, we should at least begin with accurate paperwork." She let out a slow breath. "You've always done this." "What? You make everything feel practical." He didn't answer, because practicality had kept their lives stable for nearly a decade. The silence stretched until Riley finally picked up her purse. "My attorney can correct those." "I'm sure they can." She hesitated near the front door. "Aren't you going to ask if there's someone else?" Ryan looked down at the papers again. "If there is, you'll tell me when you're ready." She waited. Nothing else came. For the first time since making her decision, uncertainty briefly crossed her face. Then she walked outside. The front door closed softly. Ryan remained seated for several minutes. He wasn't pretending the moment didn't hurt. It did. His chest felt strangely hollow. His wedding ring suddenly seemed heavier than it ever had before, but pain and panic had never been the same thing. He quietly removed the ring and placed it beside the divorce papers. Then he stood, rinsed his coffee mug, and loaded it into the dishwasher. The next morning he arrived at Mid-Ohio Freight Solutions at 6:42 a.m. Nothing about his routine changed. Warehouse supervisor Carl Henderson noticed him reviewing delivery manifests. "You look tired. Didn't sleep much? You all right?" Ryan nodded once. "I will be." Carl accepted the answer. Ryan had earned that trust over years. When he said he would be all right, people believed him. Around noon, his personal phone vibrated inside the locked drawer of his office desk. He waited until the warehouse floor quieted before answering. Margaret Sullivan spoke first. "I heard." Ryan looked through the office window toward rows of loading trailers. "I assumed you would." "I'm sorry." "So am I." She allowed a respectful silence. "Do you wish to postpone tomorrow's board meeting?" Ryan answered immediately. "No." "You don't need time. I've already lost one part of my life." "I'm not interested in neglecting another." Margaret understood exactly what he meant. "I'll inform Benjamin." The following afternoon, Ryan drove somewhere Riley had never once asked about. Atlas Industrial Systems occupied 12 floors inside a modern glass tower overlooking the Scioto Mile. Employees entering the building greeted Benjamin Carter with respect. Very few noticed the quiet man stepping out of the older Ford pickup parked beneath the executive garage. Ryan entered through a private access door. No reception desk, no visitor badge, no questions. The security director simply nodded. "Good afternoon, Mr. Robinson." Ryan returned the greeting. Inside the executive boardroom, Benjamin Carter was already reviewing financial projections projected across 3 large screens. He stood as Ryan entered. "So," Ryan placed his briefcase beside the conference table. "So," Benjamin studied his friend's face. "You could have postponed." "The company didn't file for divorce." Benjamin smiled faintly. "No." It didn't. For the next 3 hours, they discussed manufacturing expansion, distribution software, supply chain automation, acquisition targets in Michigan and Indiana. Ryan asked detailed questions, approved revised engineering budgets, rejected 2 unnecessary construction proposals, requested additional environmental studies before purchasing another industrial property. There was nothing emotional about the meeting. Business demanded discipline. Ryan had learned years ago that personal storms could not be allowed to steer corporate decisions. Near the end of the meeting, Margaret Sullivan entered, carrying a sealed navy blue portfolio. She placed it carefully in front of Ryan. "The family trust amendments." Ryan opened it. Every document bore embossed seals. Trustees, holding companies, ownership schedules, voting rights, layer after layer of carefully constructed legal protection. Benjamin watched quietly. "Sometimes I forget how complicated this structure has become." "It needed to become complicated." Margaret nodded. "After Denver." Nobody said anything else. All 3 remembered Denver. Years earlier, Ryan had built another promising technology company with college friends he trusted completely. Within 18 months, forged shareholder documents had nearly stripped him of everything he had created. He eventually won in court. But victory came after years of lawsuits, years of betrayal, years of discovering that the people sitting closest to you could sometimes become the first to sell your future. Atlas Industrial Systems had been designed differently. Nobody could quietly steal it. Nobody could manipulate ownership. Nobody outside an extremely small circle even knew who truly controlled it. Benjamin became the public face. Ryan remained invisible. It wasn't fear. It was experience. After the meeting ended, Ryan drove home before sunset. The house felt unfamiliar. Half of Riley's clothes were gone. Several framed photographs had disappeared from the hallway. The second toothbrush no longer rested beside his. He stood inside the bedroom for several moments before quietly closing the closet door. The emptiness wasn't dramatic. It was ordinary. Perhaps that made it worse. The following Friday, local business magazines published photographs from another charity event. One image occupied nearly half a page. Preston Whitaker stood smiling beside Riley. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. Both held champagne glasses. The headline read, "Columbus Power Couple Hosts Record-Breaking Fundraiser." Several coworkers left the magazine on the break room table. Ryan saw it while pouring coffee. Nobody realized he recognized the woman beside Preston. He calmly folded the magazine shut, finished pouring his coffee, returned to work. By evening, the story had spread through social media. Former neighbors commented. Mutual friends congratulated Riley. Some quietly assumed Ryan had simply been replaced by someone more successful. None of those opinions reached him. He had long ago stopped measuring truth by public conversation. Late that night, another encrypted call arrived. Benjamin's voice sounded unusually serious. The Ohio Logistics Authority officially listed the Riverside Industrial Campus. Ryan stopped walking and listened. That property had been unavailable for nearly 4 years. The valuation? Approximately $900 million. Ryan looked through the dark kitchen window. And interest, Benjamin paused. More than expected. Anyone we know? Another pause. Yes, Benjamin took a slow breath before continuing. Preston Whitaker just entered the bidding. Ryan remained completely still. His expression didn't change. He slowly closed his eyes for only a second. Then he quietly asked one question. Has he figured out who owns the property? Benjamin answered without hesitation. Not even close. Benjamin's words lingered in the silence after the call ended. Not even close. Ryan placed the phone on the kitchen counter without another word. Outside, the neighborhood had already settled into the quiet rhythm of late evening. Porch lights glowed along Brookstone Drive. A sprinkler clicked somewhere across the street. Nothing about the peaceful suburban scene suggested that one of the largest commercial acquisitions in Ohio was about to become deeply personal. He poured himself a glass of water instead of coffee. Years earlier, he would have reacted differently. Back then, betrayal had felt like an invitation to fight. Now it felt like a reason to become even more disciplined. He walked into the study at the back of the house, unlocked a narrow steel cabinet built into the wall, and removed a worn black binder. There was no company logo, no impressive title, only a small silver label. Denver. Ryan ran one finger across the cover before opening it. Inside were copies of lawsuits, bank statements, meeting notes, emails, court rulings, everything connected to the first company he had ever built. He had been 32, then convinced that talent and friendship naturally belonged together. Atlas Software Logistics had started inside a rented warehouse office outside Denver, Colorado. Ryan and 3 college friends worked 18-hour days writing inventory optimization software for regional manufacturers. They celebrated every new client with cheap pizza and folding chairs because there was never enough money for anything else. Within 3 years, revenue exceeded $80 million. Investors began calling. Banks offered expansion loans. Business magazines requested interviews. Ryan declined almost all of them. His partners did not. One interview became another. One award became another conference. Eventually, Ryan noticed something changing. The meetings became shorter whenever he entered the room. Conversations stopped when he walked through the hallway. Lawyers appeared without explanation. He ignored the warning signs. He believed friendship deserved trust. Then, one Friday afternoon, he discovered documents transferring controlling voting rights without his knowledge, forged signatures, altered board minutes, backdated agreements. The people he had trusted most had quietly prepared to remove him from the company he had created. The lawsuits lasted nearly 3 years. He eventually won. Every forged document collapsed under forensic examination. Every fraudulent transfer was reversed. Every responsible executive settled or disappeared from the company. Ryan recovered his ownership. But victory felt strangely empty. The money returned. His confidence in people did not. After the settlement, he sold nearly every remaining asset connected to Atlas Software Logistics. Friends assumed he planned to retire. Instead, he disappeared. Not physically, professionally. For almost a year, nobody in the business community knew where Ryan Robinson had gone. He spent that year studying corporate governance, trust law, asset protection, succession planning. He met attorneys who specialized in family offices, estate planners, former federal regulators, corporate compliance experts. He filled notebooks with one recurring question. How do you build something that cannot be stolen simply because people discover who owns it? Margaret Sullivan had been the first attorney to answer honestly. She never promised perfect protection. She promised preparation. People usually protect buildings, she had told him during their first meeting in Chicago. The smartest ones protect control. Ryan never forgot those words. Atlas Industrial Systems was born 18 months later. Not as a traditional corporation, as an ecosystem. Holding companies owned operating companies. Trusts owned holding companies. Independent trustees managed voting rights under strict legal agreements. No single executive could secretly transfer ownership. No board could quietly vote Ryan out. No ambitious investor could identify the true controlling owner through public filings alone. Everything required multiple layers of authorization. Everything left documented evidence. Everything slowed manipulation. Benjamin Carter became the public face of the company almost from the beginning. Benjamin had spent 2 decades leading industrial manufacturing firms with remarkable consistency, but almost no interest in celebrity. That was precisely why Ryan trusted him. During their first interview, Benjamin had asked only one unusual question. If I become CEO, who receives the credit? Ryan smiled. You do. And if something goes wrong? I do. Benjamin accepted the position before lunch. Over the following 7 years, Atlas Industrial Systems quietly expanded across the Midwest. Distribution software, warehouse automation, industrial robotics, supply chain analytics, advanced inventory systems. The company acquired struggling manufacturers, modernized outdated facilities, and invested heavily in engineering talent. While competitors spent millions advertising innovation, Atlas spent its money improving products. Clients noticed. Revenue climbed steadily. National retailers signed long-term contracts. Defense suppliers adopted Atlas logistics platforms. Automotive manufacturers licensed warehouse automation systems developed by Ryan's engineering teams. Business journalists frequently praised Benjamin Carter for his leadership. Ryan clipped several of the articles, not because they mentioned him, because they didn't. That anonymity was working exactly as intended. Every weekday morning, after approving decisions affecting thousands of employees and billions of dollars in assets. Before sunrise, Ryan still drove to Mid-Ohio Freight Solutions. Many people would have considered the routine absurd. Benjamin certainly questioned it during the company's second year. You don't need this job anymore. Ryan had smiled while watching warehouse workers load trailers. I know. Then why stay? Ryan pointed toward the loading dock. Because this reminds me who our customers actually are. Executives studied spreadsheets. Warehouse workers studied delays. Truck drivers studied weather. Ryan believed businesses failed when leaders forgot whose problems they actually solved. Working inside an ordinary logistics company kept his perspective grounded. No employee there knew they reported indirectly to one of the wealthiest industrial entrepreneurs in the region. Ryan preferred earning respect without anyone knowing what he owned. Status distorted conversations. Ordinary life revealed character. It also protected him. When strangers underestimated him, they usually behaved honestly. They revealed assumptions they would otherwise hide. He learned more by listening than speaking. That habit eventually became one of Atlas's greatest competitive advantages. Suppliers negotiated more openly. Potential acquisition targets disclosed concerns more freely. Competitors often underestimated the quiet logistics manager sitting unnoticed in conference rooms. Ryan rarely corrected them. Back in Columbus, Riley interpreted his ordinary routines very differently. She saw repetition instead of discipline. She saw modesty instead of intentional restraint. She saw comfort instead of strategy. Ryan never blamed her entirely. Very few people imagined someone worth hundreds of millions of dollars would voluntarily drive an aging pickup truck to a warehouse every morning. The image simply didn't fit modern expectations. Meanwhile, Atlas's executive committee prepared for its largest opportunity yet. The Riverside Industrial Campus stretched across nearly 400 acres outside Columbus. Originally built for heavy manufacturing decades earlier, it had gradually transformed into one of the most strategically located logistics properties in the Midwest. Direct interstate access, private rail connections, expansion capacity, modern utilities. Industry analysts called it the last major industrial property capable of supporting nationwide distribution at scale. Acquiring Riverside would permanently strengthen Atlas's national footprint. Ryan had studied the property for almost 3 years. He knew every environmental report, every zoning revision, every infrastructure assessment. He also knew something almost nobody else understood. The public believed Riverside belonged to an investment consortium preparing to exit the market. That was only partially true. Years earlier, Atlas had quietly purchased the controlling interests through a sequence of confidential transactions managed by Margaret Sullivan's legal team. Even many minority investors didn't know who ultimately controlled the project. Now the property had reached the final stage. Potential buyers would soon attend confidential executive negotiations. Ryan expected manufacturers, investment funds, international logistics companies. He had not expected Preston Whitaker. The coincidence wasn't simply uncomfortable. It threatened to merge Ryan's carefully separated personal and professional lives for the first time in years. The following morning, Margaret entered Benjamin Carter's office carrying a sealed acquisition schedule. She placed it on the conference table without speaking. Benjamin reviewed the list of approved bidders. Then he looked up. "Has Ryan seen the final attendance list?" Margaret nodded once. "He has. And he instructed us to treat Mr. Whitaker exactly like every other qualified bidder." Benjamin leaned back slowly. "No exceptions." "None." Margaret closed the folder. "But I have a feeling," she said quietly, "Mr. Whitaker is about to discover that he has been negotiating with the wrong assumptions from the very beginning." The invitation arrived at Preston Whitaker's office on a Tuesday morning. It came inside a thick navy envelope without a company logo. No promotional material, no executive biographies, no photographs of the property. Only a professionally printed letter confirming that Whitaker Development Group had advanced to the final negotiation stage for the Riverside Industrial Campus acquisition. The meeting would be held 3 weeks later. Attendance was limited. Confidentiality was mandatory. Every participant would sign updated non-disclosure agreements before entering the executive boardroom. Preston smiled before finishing the second page. Finally, he leaned back in his leather chair and looked through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Columbus. The Riverside Industrial Campus had become the city's most discussed commercial opportunity. Developers wanted it. Private equity firms wanted it. International logistics companies wanted it. Owning Riverside meant controlling one of the most important distribution corridors in the Midwest. For Preston, it was more than another investment. It was the project that would place his company alongside the largest industrial developers in America. His assistant stepped inside. "You wanted the market analysis." "Leave it." She placed 3 reports on the desk. The financing committee from First National Capital confirmed tomorrow morning. "Excellent." As she turned towards the door, Preston stopped her. "And ask Riley if she's available for dinner tonight." "Of course." 20 minutes later, Riley walked into his office carrying 2 cups of coffee. She wore a tailored cream blazer that matched the polished confidence she had gradually adopted over the previous several months. "You look pleased." Preston handed her the invitation. She read it quickly. "So this is it." "This is the biggest deal of my career." She smiled. "I knew you'd get here." He laughed. "I always do." Neither of them questioned who actually owned Riverside. Every industry publication described the seller differently. Some called it a private investment consortium. Others believed it belonged to a pension-backed infrastructure fund. Several analysts insisted an international holding company had quietly accumulated the property over the past decade. The uncertainty only increased its mystique. Preston enjoyed mysteries, mostly because he expected to solve them. Across the city, Ryan received the same updated negotiation schedule from Margaret Sullivan. He read every page without changing expression. Benjamin Carter joined him inside Atlas's executive conference room. "The bidder list is finalized." Ryan nodded. "Any withdrawals?" "None." Benjamin hesitated. "There is one change." Ryan looked up. "Victoria Chen will personally oversee financing." Ryan nodded again. "Good." Benjamin raised an eyebrow. "You sound pleased." "I am." "Why? She doesn't care about reputations." Benjamin smiled. "Only documentation." "Exactly." Victoria Chen had spent nearly 20 years financing industrial acquisitions. She had approved billion-dollar transactions. She had rejected billion-dollar transactions. She trusted audited financial statements more than magazine covers. That alone made Ryan comfortable. 3 days later, representatives from First National Capital assembled inside a polished conference room overlooking the Scioto River. Victoria Chen entered, carrying only a slim tablet and a legal pad. She greeted Preston with professional courtesy. Nothing more, no excitement, no admiration, no mention of his public reputation. The meeting began exactly at 9. "We've reviewed your preliminary acquisition proposal," Victoria said. Preston smiled confidently. "I assume everything looks favorable." Victoria didn't answer immediately. Instead, she opened a spreadsheet. "We have several questions." The smile remained on Preston's face. "Go ahead." "The projected occupancy assumptions." "We're confident." "The projected lease renewals." "Our analysts support them." "The construction cost contingencies." "We've budgeted conservatively." Victoria made several notes. Then she looked directly at him. "And the ownership verification." Preston frowned slightly. "What about it?" "The seller requires unusually extensive verification procedures." "Our attorneys can provide everything." "I'm sure they can." She paused. "But until ownership is independently confirmed, financing cannot receive final approval." Preston relaxed. "That's just paperwork." Victoria closed her tablet. Every major acquisition eventually becomes paperwork. The meeting ended 40 minutes later. As Preston left the building, he remained confident. His chief financial officer looked less certain. "Those requirements are stricter than usual." "They'll approve us." "I hope so." Preston stopped beside the elevator. "You sound nervous." "I'm careful." "There's a difference." "Sometimes there isn't." Meanwhile, Ryan spent the afternoon walking through Mid-Ohio Freight Solutions loading yard with warehouse supervisor Carl Henderson. A forklift operator struggled to position oversized machinery onto a flatbed trailer. Ryan climbed onto the loading platform himself. He adjusted the securing chains, measured the balance point, suggested moving the rear support beam 6 inches. The operator followed his advice. The load settled perfectly. Carl laughed. "You could have stayed inside the office." Ryan climbed down from the trailer. "I've never believed problems solve themselves from behind a desk. None of the workers around them realized the man tightening cargo straps had authorized an acquisition exceeding $900 million earlier that morning. That evening, Benjamin called. The engineering review is complete. And the environmental survey is even better than expected. Ryan stood on his back porch, watching distant lightning over western Ohio. What about the bidders? Several already requested extensions? Whitaker. Benjamin looked down at his notes. He submitted everything early. Ryan wasn't surprised. Preston had built a successful business by moving aggressively. Confidence often created momentum. Sometimes it also created blind spots. Anything else? Ryan asked. Benjamin hesitated. Private investigators. Ryan turned. What about them? Whitaker hired one. Ryan remained silent. They're trying to identify the beneficial owner behind Riverside. And they've found nothing. Ryan almost smiled. Margaret Sullivan had spent years ensuring they would find nothing. Ownership records existed. Every document was legal. Every filing complied with federal and state law. But the structure had been intentionally designed to protect privacy. Trusts, holding companies, independent fiduciaries, layer after layer. Perfectly transparent to regulators, nearly invisible to outsiders. Benjamin continued. They're beginning to think the owner doesn't exist. Ryan quietly laughed. Everyone exists. They just don't always introduce themselves. The following Saturday evening, Preston hosted a private dinner inside his penthouse overlooking downtown Columbus. Investors, developers, political donors, several local television personalities. The conversation inevitably turned toward Riverside. I heard you're leading the negotiations, one guest said. Preston nodded. We're in a strong position. Do you know who's selling? He shrugged. Not yet. Another investor laughed. Some people think it's an old family fortune. Someone else suggested an international sovereign wealth fund. Another guessed Wall Street. Preston lifted his glass. It doesn't really matter. No? The seller owns yesterday. He smiled confidently. I intend to own tomorrow. Laughter spread around the room. Riley smiled with everyone else. She admired how easily Preston commanded attention. Across town, Ryan spent the same evening replacing a broken fence panel in his backyard. A teenage neighbor walked over. Need a hand, Mr. Robinson? Ryan handed him a drill. I won't say no. They worked until sunset. The teenager looked at Ryan's pickup. My dad says you should probably buy a new truck. Ryan laughed. He's probably right. So why don't you... Ryan tightened the last screw. This one still does everything I ask it to do. The teenager considered that answer for a moment. I guess that makes sense? Ryan smiled. Most useful things do. Later that night, Margaret Sullivan arrived at Ryan's house carrying another sealed folder. She never discussed Atlas business over unsecured phone lines when meetings approached. Inside the kitchen, she spread several documents across the table. All bidders completed preliminary compliance reviews. Ryan examined the files. No major issues. Nothing significant. She turned one page. Except one. Ryan looked at her. Whitaker Development Group. She slid a financial disclosure toward him. There are inconsistencies between public statements and supporting documentation. Ryan studied the figures quietly. The differences were subtle, not illegal by themselves, but significant enough to deserve attention. Margaret folded her hands. The bank will notice. Ryan closed the folder. If the documents are accurate, they'll do exactly what they're supposed to do. And if they aren't, Ryan met her eyes, then the system will eventually expose them. Margaret watched him for a moment before gathering the files. You still don't want any special treatment? Ryan answered without hesitation. I don't want favors. I want the same rules applied to everyone. Margaret nodded once. I thought you'd say that. As she left the house, Ryan locked the front door and stood quietly in the darkened hallway. For the first time since Riley had left, he realized the next meeting would place every part of his life into the same room. His past, his marriage, his company, and the man who believed he was about to buy an empire without knowing who had built it. The morning of the final negotiation arrived clear and unusually cool for early September. Ryan woke at 5:15 a.m. Nothing about his routine changed. He brewed coffee, fed the neighbor's golden retriever while its owners were away on vacation, watered the flower beds Riley had planted years earlier. Then he ironed a navy suit that had already been hanging in his closet for nearly 4 years. It wasn't custom-made. It wasn't expensive. The cuffs showed faint signs of wear. Ryan preferred clothing that disappeared instead of attracting attention. He tied a dark blue silk tie, slipped a plain silver watch onto his wrist, and looked once into the hallway mirror. He didn't see a billionaire. He didn't see a victim of divorce. He saw the same man who believed every important decision should be made without ego. At exactly 7:10 a.m., he climbed into his aging Ford F-150. The engine started on the first turn. 40 minutes later, the truck rolled into the underground executive garage beneath Atlas Industrial Systems. A security officer immediately recognized him. "Good morning, Mr. Robinson." "Morning, David." "The boardroom is ready." Ryan nodded. "Thank you." He entered through a private elevator that opened directly onto the executive floor. Margaret Sullivan was already waiting. She carried 3 leather portfolios. "Everything has been verified." Ryan accepted one. "The trust documents. Certified yesterday. The ownership resolutions. Signed. The banking confirmations. Already delivered to Victoria Chen." Ryan smiled faintly. "Good." Margaret studied him for a moment. "You slept." "Well enough." She knew better than to ask another question. Ryan never performed confidence. He either possessed it or remained silent. Across Columbus, Preston Whitaker arrived at the headquarters of Atlas Industrial Systems in the back seat of a black Bentley. He adjusted his tie while his driver pulled beneath the covered entrance. The polished glass tower reflected the morning sunlight. The building was impressive, larger than he expected. He stepped onto the sidewalk beside Riley. She looked upward. "I didn't realize Atlas was this big." Neither had he. Magazine articles rarely discussed Atlas. Industry reports respected it. Wall Street tracked it. But its executives almost never appeared on television. The absence of publicity had created an illusion of modesty. Now standing before the 40-story headquarters, Preston quietly reconsidered that assumption. Inside the lobby, everything reflected restrained confidence. Natural stone floors, walnut paneling, modern architecture, no oversized company slogans, no flashy digital displays celebrating profits. Only a simple bronze inscription behind the reception desk. Atlas Industrial Systems. Nothing more. A receptionist welcomed them. "Good morning." She handed each visitor a visitor badge and a confidentiality packet. "Please sign the updated non-disclosure agreement before proceeding." Preston skimmed the document. 32 pages, stricter than usual. He signed anyway. "So, who's representing ownership today?" he asked casually. The receptionist smiled politely. "The board will introduce everyone." It wasn't an answer. Preston barely noticed. His confidence remained intact. The executive elevator carried them to the 36th floor. When the doors opened, several attorneys were already speaking quietly in the reception area. Investment bankers reviewed folders. Corporate advisors stood beside floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Columbus. Victoria Chen arrived moments later. She greeted Preston with a professional handshake. "Good morning." "Morning." "Everything ready?" "As far as the bank is concerned." She looked toward the conference room. The remaining decisions belong to ownership. Again, ownership. Everyone referred to ownership without identifying who that actually was. Benjamin Carter entered precisely at 9. He wore a charcoal suit and greeted every guest personally. Preston recognized him immediately. The CEO of Atlas Industrial Systems. Now things finally made sense. Preston smiled. So you're representing the seller? Benjamin returned the smile. I'll be facilitating today's meeting. Excellent. I think you'll find everything straightforward. Preston nodded confidently. I certainly hope so. Benjamin opened the conference room doors. Ladies and gentlemen, please. The boardroom stretched nearly the entire length of the eastern side of the building. A polished walnut table reflected the morning light. Each place contained identical leather portfolios, crystal water glasses, nameplates. Nothing excessive, only precision. Victoria Chen selected a seat midway down the table. Margaret Sullivan sat opposite her. Benjamin remained standing. The remaining attorneys quietly organized documents. Preston noticed something unusual. The chair at the head of the table remained empty. Naturally, he assumed Benjamin would sit there. Instead, Benjamin remained beside the entrance, waiting. 1 minute passed. No one spoke. Then the conference room doors opened again. Ryan Robinson entered, carrying the same worn leather briefcase he had used for years. The room changed instantly. Every attorney stood, every executive stood, every banker rose from their seat without hesitation. Margaret Sullivan was the first to speak. Good morning, Mr. Robinson. Benjamin Carter stepped forward. Good morning. Victoria Chen inclined her head respectfully. So good to see you again. Ryan acknowledged each greeting with a simple nod. Good morning. No dramatic entrance, no entourage, no announcement. Only quiet familiarity. Preston looked from face to face. Confusion slowly replaced confidence. Why was everyone standing? Ryan walked calmly toward the empty chair at the head of the table. Benjamin gently pulled it back. Please. Ryan thanked him and sat down. Only then did everyone else return to their seats. The silence felt strangely heavy. Riley stared across the table. Her breathing became shallow. She knew that briefcase. She had bought it for Ryan on their 5th wedding anniversary. She knew the navy suit. She had once complained that he should replace it. She knew the silver watch. It had belonged to his father. Nothing about Ryan had changed. Everything around him had. Preston finally leaned slightly toward Benjamin. His voice remained polite, but noticeably uncertain. I'm sorry. Benjamin looked at him. Yes. I don't believe we've been introduced. Before Benjamin could answer, Preston instinctively turned toward Ryan. Years of negotiating major business transactions had taught him one thing. The person everyone else waited for usually held the authority. Without thinking, he offered a courteous smile. Good morning. He paused for only half a second. Sir? The single word echoed more loudly than anyone expected. Riley slowly turned toward Preston, then back toward Ryan. Her expression emptied. Not disbelief, not confusion, recognition. Hundreds of tiny memories suddenly rearranged themselves inside her mind. The midnight phone calls, the calm confidence, the complete absence of financial anxiety, the way Ryan never argued about money, the way he never cared what anyone drove, the quiet certainty with which he approached every decision. She had mistaken silence for limitation. She had mistaken privacy for insignificance. Across the table, Ryan simply nodded. Good morning, Mr. Whitaker. His voice remained calm. Exactly the same voice Riley had heard across the breakfast table for nearly 10 years. Benjamin Carter closed the conference room doors. Then he looked around the room. Thank you, everyone. He placed both hands lightly on the back of his chair. Now that all required parties are present, he glanced respectfully toward Ryan before continuing. We can begin the formal ownership presentation. Riley felt her fingers tighten around the unopened portfolio in front of her. Preston slowly lowered his eyes toward the documents. For the first time in many years, he realized he had entered a negotiation without knowing who truly controlled the room. And across the polished walnut table, Ryan Robinson quietly folded his hands, waiting for the evidence, not emotion, to speak first. No one reached for a document until Ryan gave a small nod. It was almost imperceptible, yet everyone at the table understood it. Margaret Sullivan opened the first leather portfolio. Thank you for your patience. Her voice was measured, calm, and impossible to interrupt without appearing discourteous. Before discussing purchase terms, financing, or valuation, Atlas Industrial Systems requires verification that every participating bidder understands the ownership authority governing the Riverside Industrial Campus. She pressed a button on a small control panel beside her. A large display illuminated at the end of the room. The first slide contained no dramatic graphics, only a legal title: Certified Ownership Structure. Below it appeared a list of trust entities, holding companies, and operating subsidiaries connected through carefully organized charts. Preston leaned forward. He had expected a simple corporate hierarchy. Instead, the structure resembled an intricate map. Holding companies owned regional asset companies. Regional companies reported to a national management trust. Voting authority rested inside an independent fiduciary structure. Every line connected through legally documented agreements. Victoria Chen quietly followed every page. She had reviewed much of the structure during financing due diligence, but even she appreciated seeing the complete presentation. Margaret continued. The Riverside Industrial Campus is owned through Atlas Property Holdings Midwest. She clicked to the next page. Atlas Property Holdings Midwest is wholly owned by Robinson Strategic Trust. Another page appeared. The Robinson Strategic Trust is administered by independent trustees under agreements executed 7 years ago. She paused. Copies have been certified by the state of Ohio and independently verified by First National Capital Bank. Victoria nodded once. Our verification process confirms the documentation. Margaret thanked her. Then she turned another page. The screen displayed a scanned document bearing embossed seals and official certifications. These are the original trust resolutions establishing beneficial ownership. Preston frowned slightly. He looked toward his attorney, David Monroe. David had already begun reading the copies provided inside the portfolio. His expression became increasingly serious. Everything appears properly executed, David murmured. Margaret heard him. Mr. Monroe, if you would like additional certified copies, we have them available. No. David adjusted his glasses. That won't be necessary. The room became quiet again. Ryan remained almost completely silent. His hands rested comfortably on the table. He watched no one in particular. Years earlier, he would have tried explaining every decision personally. Experience had taught him something better. Evidence persuaded people far more effectively than speeches. Margaret continued. The next documents concern executive authority. Benjamin Carter stood. He walked toward the display. For 7 years, I have served as Chief Executive Officer of Atlas Industrial Systems. He spoke confidently, but without theatrical emphasis. My responsibilities include operational management acquisitions, strategic planning, and public representation. Another document appeared. However, he looked toward Ryan. My authority has always been delegated. The next page displayed the board resolution, every signature, every date, every authorization. Benjamin continued. Final authority over acquisitions exceeding $100 million has always remained with the controlling owner. Silence settled across the room. Benjamin finished the sentence calmly. Mr. Ryan Robinson. No one moved. The words themselves carried enough weight. Riley slowly lowered her eyes. She remembered laughing one evening when Ryan had arrived home wearing dusty work boots after helping repair loading equipment at the warehouse. You look more like a mechanic every year. Ryan had simply smiled. Now she wondered how many board meetings he had attended before driving home in those same boots. How many major decisions had been made before he quietly grilled dinner in their backyard. How many opportunities had she mistaken for ordinary routines, Margaret resumed. Certified ownership percentages are included on page 43. Paper quietly turned throughout the room. Preston located the page. His eyes stopped immediately. Controlling beneficial ownership. Ryan Alexander Robinson, 68.4%. The remaining percentages belonged to employee trusts and long-term investment partners. None exceeded 6%. There was no question, no ambiguity. Ryan controlled Atlas. Not symbolically, legally. Preston read the figure twice. Then a third time. He slowly closed the portfolio. This isn't public. Margaret answered immediately. No. Why? Because private companies are not obligated to publish confidential ownership structures. Preston looked toward Victoria. You verified this, she answered without hesitation. Our legal department independently verified every document. The signatures, verified. The trust, verified. The voting authority, verified. The beneficial ownership, verified. Each answer arrived with absolute certainty. Ryan finally spoke. Only one sentence. Privacy isn't deception, Mr. Whitaker. His voice remained calm. It simply isn't publicity. Preston looked directly at him. You've been operating this company the entire time, Ryan answered honestly. I've been responsible for it. Benjamin smiled slightly. I've been fortunate enough to help lead it. There was no competition between them, no struggle for recognition, only mutual respect. That surprised Preston almost as much as the ownership itself. He had built his own company around visibility, magazine interviews, awards, public announcements, social media campaigns. Ryan had apparently built his around the opposite philosophy. Margaret distributed another folder. Inside you'll find board minutes covering every acquisition completed during the last 7 years. The documents were meticulous. Environmental approvals, financial audits, independent valuations, compliance reports. Every major decision carried multiple signatures, independent reviews, outside legal opinions. Ryan had anticipated almost every possible challenge years before this meeting. David Monroe quietly whispered to Preston, I don't see any procedural weaknesses. You've checked everything already. I'm still checking. David turned another page. But so far, he looked genuinely impressed. I've never seen ownership records prepared this thoroughly. Across the table, Riley remained silent. Her attention drifted toward Ryan's hands. She remembered those hands repairing leaking faucets, changing flat tires, building bookshelves, planting flowers. She had spent years believing they belonged to a hard-working but financially ordinary husband. Those same hands had quietly signed contracts shaping an industrial company worth billions. Not once had Ryan mentioned it. Not once had he used it to win an argument. Not once had he tried impressing anyone. The realization hurt far more than surprise. Because she suddenly understood something she had refused to see. Ryan had never hidden wealth out of embarrassment. He had hidden it because he genuinely believed it should not define him. Margaret reached the final section. The remaining documents concern Riverside Industrial Campus. She opened another certified binder. Ownership transferred to Atlas Property Holdings through 6 separate transactions completed between 2020 and 2025. Each acquisition appeared on screen. Purchase agreements, county filings, recorded deeds, environmental certifications, federal compliance approvals. Everything matched. Nothing had been rushed. Nothing depended upon verbal assurances. Everything rested on documented fact. Victoria closed her own binder. From the bank's perspective, ownership has been conclusively established. Margaret inclined her head. Thank you. Preston slowly exhaled. He had entered the room expecting to negotiate from a position of confidence. Instead, every assumption he carried into the building had quietly disappeared. Yet one question remained. He leaned forward. If Mr. Robinson owns Atlas, he looked directly at Ryan. Why continue working as a logistics manager? Several executives glanced toward Ryan. Benjamin did not answer. Margaret did not answer. Victoria did not answer. They all waited. Ryan folded his hands together. His expression never changed. When people know what you own, he said quietly, they often stop showing you who they really are. The room became completely silent. He continued, A warehouse tells me more about business than a corner office ever could. He paused. And people reveal far more when they believe you're ordinary. No one challenged the statement, because everyone in the room had just experienced it themselves. Preston slowly lowered his eyes. For the first time since entering Atlas headquarters, he understood that he hadn't underestimated Ryan's wealth. He had underestimated Ryan himself. Before anyone could speak again, Margaret received a message on her tablet. She read it once, then looked toward Victoria Chen. It appears, she said calmly, that the due diligence department has completed one additional review. Victoria's expression sharpened. So they have finished. Margaret closed the tablet. They've found something in Whitaker Development Group's financial disclosures. The room fell silent once more. And this time every eye slowly turned toward Preston. No one spoke for several seconds. The silence felt different now. Earlier, it had been filled with uncertainty. Now it carried expectation. Preston looked first at Margaret Sullivan, then at Victoria Chen. What exactly did they find? Margaret didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slid her tablet across the polished walnut table toward Victoria. As this concerns financing, I believe Miss Chen should explain. Victoria adjusted her glasses before reading the report one final time. She had learned long ago that words spoken inside executive boardrooms often carried consequences far beyond the room itself. Accuracy mattered, especially now. She closed the tablet. Our due diligence team completed its secondary verification this morning. Preston remained composed. And the review identified several inconsistencies. Inconsistencies aren't unusual. No, Victoria agreed calmly. They're not. She folded her hands. But unresolved inconsistencies become material issues. Ryan watched quietly. He felt no satisfaction, only concentration. This was precisely why every acquisition required independent verification. Not because anyone expected dishonesty, because assumptions had no place inside transactions of this size. Victoria continued. Your public investor presentation projects 96% occupancy across 4 commercial developments. Correct. Our auditors independently verified tenant records. She opened another folder. They confirmed 81%. Preston frowned. Several leases were under renewal. Victoria nodded. The report acknowledges that. She slid photocopies across the table. However, projected renewals cannot be reported as active occupancy. David Monroe immediately reached for the documents. His expression tightened. He understood the distinction. Banks did too. Occupancy projections affected cash flow. Cash flow affected valuation. Valuation affected financing. One optimistic assumption could influence hundreds of millions of dollars. Preston remained calm. That's an accounting interpretation. Victoria shook her head gently. It's a lending standard. She turned another page. Our review also identified differences between projected rental income and executed lease agreements. David continued reading. His eyes moved more slowly now. This wasn't included in our internal summary, Victoria answered politely, because the information became available yesterday afternoon. Another page. The construction reserve reported to investors differs from the reserve documented inside audited financial statements. Preston leaned forward. The reserve exists. No one disputes that. Victoria looked directly at him. The reported amount does. The conference room grew noticeably quieter. Several attorneys began taking notes. Benjamin Carter remained perfectly still. Ryan noticed something subtle. Not fear, not anger. Only the gradual disappearance of certainty from Preston's posture. Earlier that morning he had entered the room sitting comfortably against the back of his chair. Now he leaned forward. Both elbows rested on the table. One hand held a pen he no longer used. Confidence often changed posture before changing expression. Margaret opened another certified folder. These observations are preliminary. She deliberately chose the word. They are not conclusions. Ryan appreciated that. Facts deserved patience. Speculation deserved none. David Monroe finally spoke. We'll provide clarification. Victoria nodded. I'm sure you will. The bank simply cannot finalize financing until every material discrepancy has been resolved. No accusation, no raised voices, only procedure. Exactly as Ryan believed it should be. Across the table, Riley remained silent. She looked toward Preston. He still appeared composed, but she noticed something she had never seen before. He wasn't controlling the conversation anymore. For years, she had watched Preston dominate meetings through confidence alone. Today, confidence wasn't enough. Every answer required documents. Every explanation required verification. Charm held surprisingly little value against certified records. Ryan quietly observed her expression. He remembered another conversation months earlier. They had attended a neighborhood barbecue. One of Riley's co-workers had arrived driving a new European sports sedan. Several guests gathered around the car immediately. Later that evening, Riley had asked him a question. Doesn't it ever bother you that everyone else seems to be moving ahead? Ryan had smiled. I don't know where everyone else is going. She hadn't understood the answer then. Perhaps she was beginning to now. Victoria continued reviewing the report. Our environmental review revealed no concerns. She turned another page. Engineering inspections exceeded expectations. Another page. The property itself remains exceptionally strong. She paused. The financing concerns relate exclusively to bidder disclosures. Preston looked toward Ryan. You've been reviewing my company. Ryan answered honestly. No. Our compliance teams have. So you knew. I knew the same information everyone in this room now knows. Ryan folded his hands again. The process is identical for every bidder. Preston studied him carefully. You didn't interfere. No. You didn't ask them to investigate me further. No. Why not? Ryan answered without hesitation. Because if the documents support your position, additional investigation helps you. And if they don't, Ryan met his eyes, then additional investigation protects everyone. No one challenged the logic. Benjamin Carter finally spoke. Atlas has rejected larger offers than yours before. Preston turned toward him. For this reason, Benjamin nodded. We don't sell strategic assets to the highest promise. He glanced toward Victoria. We sell to the strongest verified proposal. The distinction mattered. Promises, verification. One depended upon confidence. The other depended upon evidence. Margaret received another notification. She quietly reviewed it before addressing the room. Our external auditors have completed reconciliation. Victoria looked up immediately. So quickly. They prioritized Riverside. Margaret handed several printed pages to every attorney. David Monroe reviewed them. His forehead slowly tightened. "This changes the projected leverage ratio," Victoria answered calmly. "It does. And financing, it remains under review." No one said denied. No one said approved. Only under review. Ryan appreciated the precision. Business wasn't a courtroom. Nothing should be decided before evidence finished speaking. Outside the conference room, employees continued ordinary work. Phones rang, meetings started, engineers reviewed software, analysts processed inventory forecasts. Very few people inside Atlas headquarters realized one of the company's most important acquisitions had quietly become something much larger. Inside the boardroom, Riley looked toward the large windows overlooking Columbus. The city appeared exactly as it had that morning. Traffic moved normally. Construction cranes continued lifting steel. People hurried along sidewalks. The world hadn't changed. Only her understanding of it had. She thought about Ryan leaving every morning before sunrise. She remembered teasing him about never taking expensive vacations. She remembered asking why he refused luxury watches. He had once answered while tightening a loose kitchen cabinet hinge. "I'd rather own time than decorate it." She had laughed. Now she understood. Ryan had never been pretending to be ordinary. He had simply refused to build his identity around wealth. That realization hurt in ways she hadn't expected. Across the table, Preston remained focused on the financial reports. His confidence had not disappeared, but it had become cautious. He looked toward Victoria. "What happens next?" "The Compliance Committee completes its review. And after that, if every issue is resolved satisfactorily, financing proceeds. And if it isn't," Victoria didn't soften her answer, "then the committee recommends against funding." The words settled heavily across the room. For the first time that day, Preston understood something uncomfortable. This meeting wasn't primarily about negotiating price. It was about qualifying for trust. Money alone could not purchase that. Margaret closed the final folder. "We'll recess for 30 minutes while legal counsel reviews today's materials." Everyone slowly stood. Conversations began quietly. Attorneys gathered into small groups. Bank representatives compared notes. Benjamin walked toward Ryan. "You handled that well." Ryan looked toward the windows. "I didn't handle anything." Benjamin smiled. "You know what I mean." Ryan shook his head gently. "The documents handled it." As the room gradually emptied, Riley remained standing beside her chair. She watched Ryan speaking quietly with Margaret Sullivan. No boasting, no dramatic gestures, no attempt to embarrass Preston. Exactly the same calm man she had once believed lacked ambition. Only now she realized something she wished she had understood years earlier. Real authority rarely needed to announce itself. It simply entered the room. And everyone else stood. Just then, one of Atlas's compliance officers hurried through the conference room doors, carrying another sealed envelope marked "Confidential." He walked directly towards Margaret. "I think you should see this before the afternoon session begins." Margaret opened the envelope, scanned the first page, and her composed expression grew noticeably more serious. She turned slowly toward Ryan. "This," she said quietly, "may require federal investigators." The room did not immediately return to order after the recess. Attorneys gathered in small circles. Bank representatives quietly compared notes. Compliance officers moved between conference rooms carrying sealed folders instead of laptops following Atlas's policy for sensitive transactions. Ryan stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Columbus. He held a cup of black coffee that had already gone cold. He wasn't thinking about Preston. He wasn't thinking about Riley. He was thinking about process. Margaret Sullivan approached without interrupting his thoughts. "The compliance team found additional documentation." Ryan turned slightly. "Verified?" "They're working through the chain of custody now." "Good. She waited. You don't want to know what it is? I'll know when it's verified? Margaret smiled faintly. That answer was exactly what she expected. 7 years earlier, Ryan would have demanded immediate answers. Years of building Atlas had taught him something different. Information arrived in stages. Truth deserved patience. Speculation created mistakes. Across the executive floor, Preston sat alone inside a smaller conference room reserved for legal counsel. David Monroe spread financial statements across the table. Neither man spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, Preston broke the silence. Tell me the truth. David looked up. I always do. How serious is this? David removed his glasses. The occupancy issue can probably be explained. The reserve account? We'll need supporting documentation. The lease projections. David exhaled slowly. Those concern me more. Preston leaned back. We've done nothing illegal. David chose his next words carefully. I didn't say otherwise. Then what's the problem? The bank isn't asking whether something is criminal. He tapped the reports. They're asking whether every representation is accurate. There was an important difference. Inside a courtroom, intent often mattered. Inside a financing committee, accuracy mattered even more. Preston rubbed his forehead. I've closed deals with less paperwork than this. David looked directly at him. You've never negotiated against Atlas. Meanwhile, Riley wandered into the executive lounge overlooking the city. She wasn't hungry. She wasn't interested in coffee. Her thoughts refused to settle. She remembered Ryan fixing a broken washing machine instead of replacing it. She remembered asking why he refused to hire contractors for simple repairs. His answer echoed clearly. If something still works, throwing it away doesn't make much sense. She had interpreted those words as financial limitation. Now they sounded like philosophy. She realized she could barely remember Ryan ever complaining about money, not because he lacked it, because money had never occupied the center of his thinking. The realization became heavier with every passing minute. Inside another conference room, Victoria Chen spoke privately with 2 senior credit analysts. Walk me through the timeline again. One analyst opened a digital file. The discrepancies first appeared after we reconciled tenant certifications. The supporting documents, they're authentic. The source, county records. Victoria nodded. So nothing originated from anonymous reporting. No. Good. Anonymous allegations rarely influenced financing decisions. Certified public records always did. She closed the folder. We continue following procedure. At exactly 1:30 p.m., everyone returned to the executive boardroom. The atmosphere had changed, not tense, more deliberate. Benjamin Carter resumed his position near the center of the room. Thank you. He waited until everyone was seated. We'll continue. Margaret Sullivan remained standing. Our morning session established ownership authority. She placed another certified binder on the table. This afternoon concerns bidder qualification. Again, the language remained careful. Qualification, not accusation. She continued. As part of Atlas policy, every bidder undergoes identical legal, financial, and regulatory review. She looked toward Preston. This policy has existed for 7 years. Ryan quietly appreciated that she mentioned the timeline. No one could reasonably argue the procedure had been invented specifically for today's meeting. Margaret opened the binder. Our compliance department identified several financial reporting differences requiring clarification. David Monroe immediately stood. We're prepared to respond. Margaret nodded respectfully. Please. David approached the presentation screen. For nearly 20 minutes, he explained projected lease renewals, construction reserves, market assumptions, expected refinancing. He presented supporting charts, cash flow forecasts, independent market studies. His explanations were professional, measured. No one interrupted. When he finished, Victoria Chen thanked him. "Your presentation answers several questions." David relaxed slightly. But every experienced attorney understood the significance of that word. Victoria continued, "It doesn't answer all of them." She displayed another spreadsheet. "This income projection references 3 executed lease agreements." She enlarged one section. "Our auditors confirmed only 2. David examined the screen. "One agreement was verbally extended," Victoria answered calmly. "Verbal extensions cannot be recognized under lending standards." Another spreadsheet appeared. "This reserve account includes expected insurance reimbursements." David nodded. "Correct." "Have they been approved?" "They're under review." Victoria looked around the room. "Then they remain expected." "Not received." Again, the distinction mattered. Ryan noticed Preston's shoulders gradually stiffening, not from anger, from realizing every optimistic assumption now carried measurable consequences. Margaret received permission from Benjamin to continue. The Compliance Committee also reviewed historical communications associated with the submitted financial package. David frowned. "What communications?" Margaret opened another folder. "Emails voluntarily provided during document production." Preston looked surprised. "We submitted those." "You did." Margaret selected one printed page. "This particular correspondence discusses occupancy assumptions before investor presentations." David reached for the copy. His expression changed almost immediately. "When did you obtain this?" "It was included among materials produced by your accounting firm." Preston looked toward David. "You've seen this before," David answered honestly. "No." Margaret didn't dramatize the moment. She simply read one sentence aloud. "The projected occupancy should remain above 95% until after financing discussions conclude." Silence. No one rushed to interpret the sentence. Context mattered. Intent mattered. Ryan appreciated that. Margaret closed the page. "We're not offering conclusions." She emphasized each word. "We're requesting clarification." Victoria agreed. The email by itself proves nothing. She looked toward Preston. But together with the reporting differences, she allowed the sentence to remain unfinished. Everyone understood it. Preston leaned forward. "That message was taken out of context." Margaret answered immediately. "Then we'll review the full context." No objection. None. Again, no accusations, only procedure. Ryan admired the discipline in the room. Years earlier, he might have confronted Preston personally. Instead, the system was functioning exactly as designed. Independent review, professional skepticism, equal treatment, nothing more, nothing less. Suddenly, the conference room doors opened. An Atlas compliance officer entered carrying another sealed folder. He walked directly to Margaret Sullivan. She read the first page, then the second. Her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Benjamin noticed. "What is it?" Margaret looked toward Victoria. "It concerns federal reporting." Victoria immediately stood. "Confirmed." Margaret nodded once. "Confirmed through 2 independent sources." The room became completely still. David Monroe slowly removed his glasses again. "What federal reporting?" Margaret looked toward Ryan before answering. Ryan simply nodded. "Proceed." She opened the folder. "Our review identified discrepancies involving financial certifications submitted to multiple lending institutions." Preston spoke immediately. "That's impossible." Margaret remained calm. "The documents originate from the institutions themselves." David closed his eyes briefly. He understood what that meant. This had moved beyond ordinary negotiation. If financial certifications differed materially between lenders, regulators would almost certainly request explanations. Victoria quietly gathered her files. I'm obligated to notify our Federal Compliance Division. No one argued. No one protested. It wasn't personal. It was policy. Ryan folded his hands. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he looked directly at Preston. His voice remained as calm as it had been that morning. Mr. Whitaker. Preston met his eyes. I hope every document ultimately supports your explanation. The sentence surprised everyone. There was no triumph, no sarcasm, no humiliation, only sincerity. Because Ryan genuinely believed innocent people should be protected by evidence, and guilty people should be judged by the same evidence, nothing else. Outside, distant thunder rolled across Columbus. Inside the boardroom, federal compliance procedures had already begun, and for the first time since entering Atlas headquarters, Preston realized the negotiation itself was no longer the most important event unfolding that day. Rain began falling just as the first calls were placed to federal compliance officers. The drops traced slow lines across the glass walls of the executive boardroom, softening the skyline beyond. Inside, however, nothing softened. Every conversation became more deliberate. Every sentence was chosen carefully. Victoria Chen closed her laptop and addressed everyone present. At this point, First National Capital is formally suspending final financing approval. Preston looked directly at her. Suspending. Pending regulatory review. For how long? As long as necessary. Those 4 words landed harder than any accusation. A suspension did not declare guilt. It simply stopped momentum. And momentum had always been Preston Whitaker's greatest advantage. He built projects quickly, raised capital quickly, negotiated quickly. Today, everything had slowed to the speed of documentation. David Monroe leaned toward his client. We expected this possibility. Preston nodded once, though his expression suggested otherwise. Across the table, Ryan remained silent. Benjamin Carter quietly organized the remaining files, while Margaret Sullivan cataloged every certified exhibit presented during the meeting. Nothing would leave the room without a documented record. That had been Atlas policy since its founding. Years earlier, Ryan had insisted upon it. Every important meeting should be capable of explaining itself years later. Employees initially considered the rule excessive. Now they understood why. Memory faded. Documents did not. Benjamin looked around the room. As today's acquisition process cannot continue until financing eligibility is restored, Atlas will postpone final bid evaluations. No one objected. There was little point. Without financing, there could be no acquisition. Preston slowly gathered his papers. So that's it, Benjamin answered professionally. For today. And Riverside. It remains under Atlas ownership. The reminder was subtle but unmistakable. Nothing had changed. The property had never been Preston's. He had only hoped to buy it. Now even that possibility had become uncertain. The meeting officially adjourned. Executives began leaving in small groups. Attorneys exchanged business cards. Bank representatives quietly scheduled follow-up reviews. Within minutes, the boardroom that had held so much tension became almost empty. Only Ryan remained seated. He watched maintenance staff collecting untouched water glasses. A young employee accidentally dropped a folder. Ryan immediately stood and helped gather the scattered papers. Thank you, sir, the employee said instinctively. Ryan smiled. No problem. The employee hurried away without realizing the man helping him owned the company. Ryan preferred it that way. Margaret approached. You didn't have to do that. They were on the floor. You know what I mean. Ryan looked toward the empty chairs surrounding the conference table. People notice how you treat someone when the meeting is over. Margaret smiled. I've been working with you for 7 years. And? You still surprise me. Meanwhile, Preston and Riley rode the executive elevator down to the lobby without speaking. The silence between them felt unfamiliar. Usually after major meetings, Preston analyzed every detail. Today's meeting resisted easy explanation. As the elevator doors opened, several financial reporters waited outside the building entrance. News traveled quickly through downtown Columbus. One reporter stepped forward. "Mr. Whitaker, do you have any comment regarding today's negotiations?" Preston didn't stop walking. "No comment." "Has financing been delayed?" "No comment." "Were federal regulators contacted?" David Monroe stepped between the reporters and his client. "The acquisition process remains confidential." The group reached the waiting Bentley. Only after the doors closed did Preston finally exhale. Riley looked toward him. "I've never seen you speechless." He stared through the rain-covered window. "I underestimated him." She didn't ask who. She already knew. "I thought he was just—" He stopped. "Just what?" Riley asked quietly. "A quiet husband who never became anything?" The words hung between them. Neither said another word during the drive home. Back at Atlas headquarters, Ryan returned to his office instead of celebrating. There was nothing to celebrate. He opened the day's remaining agenda: engineering review, employee benefit proposal, warehouse automation schedule, 3 interviews for regional operations managers. Business continued. It always did. Benjamin entered, carrying another stack of folders. "I canceled your afternoon?" Ryan looked up. "Why?" "I assumed you'd want time." "For what?" Benjamin almost laughed. "The most unusual meeting we've ever had." Ryan leaned back. "We still have employees waiting for decisions." Benjamin shook his head. "Sometimes I wonder if you're actually human." Ryan smiled faintly. "I've asked myself the same question after some board meetings." Benjamin sat across from him. "For what it's worth." Ryan waited. "You handled Riley better than most people could have." Ryan looked out the window. "I wasn't there to handle Riley." "I know. I was there to conduct business." Benjamin nodded slowly. "And that's exactly why everyone trusts you." Late that afternoon, Victoria Chen called Ryan directly. "I wanted you to hear this from me." "I'm listening." "Our compliance division officially notified federal banking regulators." Ryan wasn't surprised. "Expected." "They'll probably request additional records?" "They should." Victoria paused. "You really don't seem interested in winning." Ryan considered the observation. "I've already won if the process is fair." She smiled on the other end of the call. "That's an unusual answer." "It's an honest one." After ending the call, Ryan left the executive office and drove to Mid-Ohio Freight Solutions. Carl Henderson was standing outside the warehouse watching employees unload a delayed shipment. "You actually came in?" Ryan looked confused. "I work here." Carl laughed. "I meant after your meeting." Ryan froze for half a second. "What meeting?" Carl grinned. "My brother works downtown." "He said some huge real estate deal made the business news." Ryan simply shrugged. "I heard something about that." Carl pointed toward a trailer waiting at Dock 4. "Well, while billionaires fight over buildings," he smiled, "we've got 2 late deliveries." Ryan picked up a clipboard. "Let's fix the deliveries first." For the next 2 hours, he helped reorganize loading schedules. He directed forklift traffic. He climbed into trailers to inspect damaged pallets. By sunset, every delayed shipment had left the yard. None of the drivers knew the man adjusting freight schedules had spent the morning sitting at the head of one of the most important corporate negotiations in the state. That evening, local television stations finally aired their first reports. The headlines remained cautious. Major industrial acquisition delayed. Financing review continues. Confidential ownership structure revealed. No names of regulators appeared. No allegations were announced. only facts already confirmed. Preston watched the reports from the living room of his penthouse. The television volume remained low. Riley sat several feet away. Neither commented. Across town, Ryan didn't watch the news at all. Instead, he sat on his back porch with a notebook balanced on one knee. He reviewed employee scholarship applications for Atlas's annual technical education program. One essay described a mechanic hoping to become an industrial engineer. Another came from the daughter of a warehouse supervisor. Ryan smiled as he read. These were the investments he cared about most. His phone vibrated. Margaret Sullivan. They've scheduled the first regulatory interviews. When? Monday morning. Ryan closed the notebook. And Mr. Whitaker. Margaret looked down at the schedule in front of her. He'll be interviewed first? Ryan quietly looked out into the darkness beyond his backyard. The acquisition had stopped being the central story. Now the truth itself was moving forward. And unlike negotiations, truth could not be delayed forever. Monday morning arrived without headlines. No television crews gathered outside federal offices. No dramatic leaks appeared online. Regulatory investigations rarely unfolded the way people imagined. They advanced through calendars, records, interviews, timelines. Ryan appreciated that. The truth deserved patience. At 7:45 a.m., he parked outside Mid-Ohio Freight Solutions as he always did. Carl Henderson looked at him with obvious disbelief. I thought you'd be downtown. Ryan accepted a clipboard from the dispatch office. I've got 2 safety inspections before 9. Carl laughed. Most people would have taken the day off. Ryan looked toward the loading docks. Most people don't have 3 trucks waiting for inspection. He spent the next hour walking through trailers, checking brake reports, lighting systems, and cargo restraints. Nothing about his routine suggested that federal regulators would be interviewing one of the most recognizable developers in Ohio, only a few miles away. Across Columbus, Preston Whitaker entered the regional offices of the Federal Banking Compliance Division. The conference room looked disappointingly ordinary. Gray walls, fluorescent lights, a rectangular table, a digital recorder, no intimidation, no courtroom atmosphere, just procedure. David Monroe sat beside him. Across the table, 2 investigators introduced themselves. Mr. Whitaker, thank you for coming. Preston nodded. I'm happy to cooperate. We appreciate that. The recorder was switched on. The first questions were simple. Corporate structure, subsidiaries, investment partnerships, lending relationships. Everything progressed professionally. Then the investigators placed several financial summaries on the table. We'd like clarification regarding these occupancy reports. Preston answered carefully. Our projections reflected anticipated renewals. Were those renewals executed? Not all of them. So why were they included in investor materials? David Monroe gently placed a hand on the table. My client believes the reports accurately reflected expected performance. One investigator nodded. We understand. Another page appeared. This reserve account? Preston looked down. Yes. The reported figure differs from your audited statement. Our accounting department can explain that. We'll certainly ask them. No raised voices. No accusations. Only questions. The interview continued for nearly 3 hours. Meanwhile, Ryan attended a routine warehouse safety meeting. Employees discussed forklift maintenance, loading dock repairs, holiday scheduling. He listened more than he spoke. Afterward, one young supervisor approached him. Mr. Robinson. Ryan looked up. I've been offered another job. Ryan smiled. Congratulations. I'm not sure whether I should take it. What matters most to you? The supervisor thought for a moment. They're paying more. Ryan nodded. And I don't trust the management. Ryan smiled faintly. Money solves expensive problems. The supervisor waited. It doesn't solve difficult people. The young man remained silent. I think you already know your answer. He nodded slowly. I guess I do. Ryan returned to his office. His encrypted phone vibrated precisely at noon. Margaret Sullivan. The interview finished. How did it go? They requested additional documentation. Ryan wasn't surprised. They should. There was something else. Ryan waited. Mr. Whitaker requested a private meeting. Ryan remained quiet. With me? With you? He leaned back in his chair. When? As soon as possible. Ryan looked through the office window toward the warehouse floor. Forklifts crossed carefully marked lanes. Drivers completed inspection checklists. Business continued exactly as it had the previous Friday. What does he want? Margaret answered honestly. He didn't say. Ryan considered the request for several moments. He remembered the outline he had quietly followed throughout his career. Never negotiate while angry. Never refuse a conversation simply because it's uncomfortable. Never confuse listening with agreeing. Schedule it. You'll meet him? Yes. When? This afternoon. Margaret paused. I'll arrange it. The meeting took place inside a smaller conference room at Atlas headquarters, rather than the executive boardroom. No bankers, no investors, no reporters. Only Ryan, Preston, David Monroe, Margaret Sullivan. A pot of untouched coffee rested in the center of the table. Ryan entered first. He removed his jacket and folded it neatly across the back of his chair. A few moments later, Preston walked in. He looked noticeably different, not defeated, simply tired. The confidence that had once filled every room had become quieter. They shook hands. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Ryan nodded. You asked. Everyone took their seats. For nearly half a minute, nobody spoke. Finally, Preston broke the silence. I owe you something. Ryan remained attentive. An apology. Margaret glanced briefly toward Ryan. He gave no visible reaction. Preston continued. I judged you. Ryan said nothing. I assumed a man driving an old pickup truck and managing warehouse operations couldn't possibly. He stopped himself. Ryan finished the sentence gently. Be worth listening to. Preston lowered his eyes. Something like that. Silence returned. Then Ryan spoke calmly. You weren't the first. And probably not the last. Ryan almost smiled. No. Preston looked directly at him. I also owe you another apology. Ryan waited. For involving Riley. Again, Ryan remained silent. I won't pretend I knew everything. Preston continued carefully. But I knew enough. He exhaled slowly. I should have handled that differently. Ryan folded his hands. I appreciate your honesty. The words surprised everyone, especially Preston. You do. I appreciate honesty whenever it arrives. Preston looked relieved for the first time that day. Then he reached into his briefcase. I have a proposal. David Monroe looked toward him, but said nothing. Preston slid a document across the table. A partnership. Ryan didn't touch it. You haven't read it. I don't need to. Preston frowned. Why? Ryan answered quietly. Because you're offering it for the wrong reason. The room became still. You think I'm trying to save the acquisition? I think you're trying to repair what can't be repaired through paperwork. Preston looked at the document. You're probably right. Ryan finally reached for the folder. Not to open it, only to slide it gently back across the table. My answer is still no. Preston accepted the rejection without argument. I expected that. Ryan leaned forward slightly. This isn't about punishment. No. No. He spoke with complete sincerity. Atlas chooses long-term partners long before acquisitions begin. You never considered me. I considered your company. And It wasn't ready. Preston slowly nodded. For the first time in years, he found himself with nothing persuasive left to say. Money, influence, status. None of them changed Ryan's decision. After another long silence, Preston stood. He extended his hand once more. I hope everything eventually proves to be explainable. Ryan rose and shook it firmly. So do I. No sarcasm, no hidden meaning. He meant every word. As Preston turned toward the door, he paused. Without looking back, he spoke quietly. I understand now. Ryan waited. The richest man in this room was never the one with the most expensive watch. The door closed softly behind him. Margaret looked toward Ryan. You know he'll probably never forget this meeting. Ryan picked up his jacket. I hope he remembers the right part. What part? Ryan switched off the conference room lights before answering. That contract's end. He looked once toward the empty chair Preston had occupied. But character stays. The house looked smaller than Riley remembered, not because anything had changed, because she had. She parked across the street just after sunset and remained inside her car for several minutes. The porch light was on. The maple tree Ryan had planted during their second year of marriage had grown enough to cast long shadows across the front yard. The flower beds were still neat. The fence Ryan had repaired weeks earlier still looked new. Nothing about the property suggested the life inside had ever fallen apart. She finally stepped out of the car. Each step toward the front door felt strangely familiar. She had walked this path thousands of times, carrying groceries, laughing after dinner with friends, decorating for Christmas, rushing to work on Monday mornings. Now she felt like a visitor. She rang the bell. A few moments later, the door opened. Ryan stood exactly as she remembered him. Simple blue button-down shirt, dark jeans, sleeves rolled to his forearms. No security staff, no assistants, no symbols of extraordinary wealth, only Ryan. He looked mildly surprised. Good evening. Hi. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ryan stepped aside. Come in. She entered slowly. The living room looked almost identical. The same bookshelf. The same oak coffee table they had bought during their first year together. The same framed photograph of Ryan's parents above the fireplace. Only one thing had changed. The wedding photograph was gone. Ryan noticed her eyes lingering on the empty space. I put it away. She nodded quietly. I understand. He motioned toward the kitchen. Coffee. She almost smiled. You still make coffee this late? I still sleep just fine. She laughed softly. It was the first genuine laugh either of them had shared in months. Ryan poured 2 mugs without asking how she preferred hers. He still remembered. 1 spoon of sugar, a little cream. He placed the mug in front of her. Thank you. They sat across from each other at the same kitchen table, where the divorce papers had once rested. Neither seemed eager to begin. Finally, Riley looked around the room. You haven't changed much. Ryan glanced toward the hallway. I don't think I needed to. She lowered her eyes. No. You probably didn't. Silence settled again. This time it wasn't uncomfortable, only honest. Riley took a slow breath. I've replayed a lot of conversations recently. Ryan listened. I kept thinking about all the things I thought I understood. She looked directly at him. I didn't understand any of them. Ryan remained quiet. She continued. I thought you lacked ambition. I know. I thought you were comfortable staying ordinary. Ryan smiled gently. I was comfortable. But not because you couldn't become more. He shook his head. I never wanted to become someone else. The sentence landed heavily. Riley remembered how often she had measured success through comparisons. Larger houses, more expensive vacations, luxury events, public recognition. Ryan had never competed in that race. Not because he couldn't, because he had chosen another one. I owe you an apology. He met her eyes. I know. I don't expect forgiveness. Ryan answered calmly. Those aren't the same thing. She frowned slightly. What do you mean? I forgave you a long time ago. She stared at him. You did? The day you handed me the divorce papers. Her eyes filled. How? Ryan wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. Because carrying resentment would have hurt me more than it hurt you. She looked away before the tears could fall. I thought you didn't care. I cared. He spoke quietly. I simply refused to let pain decide my behavior. For several moments, only the sound of the refrigerator humming filled the kitchen. Finally, Riley asked the question that had been haunting her since the meeting at Atlas. Why didn't you ever tell me? Ryan understood exactly what she meant. About Atlas. He leaned back. I wanted someone to love the life we were building. She listened carefully. Not the balance sheet behind it. You didn't trust me. I trusted you. Then why keep it secret? Ryan answered without hesitation. Because once people know what you own. He smiled faintly. It's difficult to know whether they're looking at you or your money. She closed her eyes. I proved your point. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth already occupied the space between them. After another long silence, Ryan stood. I have something for you. He disappeared into the study and returned carrying a large, sealed envelope. He placed it gently on the table. She looked at it. What's this? Open it. Inside were neatly organized documents, property records, investment statements, insurance policies, trust distributions. She looked increasingly confused. What am I looking at? Ryan pointed toward the first page. The divorce settlement. I've already seen it. Not all of it. She turned another page, then another. Her breathing slowed. There was a separate schedule attached to the agreement, one she barely remembered signing. Its language had seemed technical at the time. Now she read it carefully. Beneficiary provisions, educational trust distributions, long-term investment income, medical coverage protections. What is this? Ryan answered simply. Protection. She looked up. You left all of this in place. I did. After everything. You were my wife for 10 years. His voice remained steady. I wasn't going to leave you vulnerable simply because our marriage ended. She stared at him in disbelief. There are investment accounts here. Yes. They've grown. Yes. You never touched them. Ryan shook his head. They were always intended for your future. Tears finally escaped. I don't deserve this. Ryan didn't disagree. He simply said, maybe not. She lowered her head. I was cruel to you. I know. I embarrassed you. I remember. I left you for another man. You did. She wiped her eyes. And you still protected me. Ryan looked out the kitchen window toward the backyard. I made that decision before I knew what the future would look like. He turned back toward her. I didn't want the worst day of my life to become the reason I made the worst decision of my life. The words broke something inside her. She covered her face with both hands. I don't know how to live with what I did. Ryan waited until she looked up again. You don't. She frowned. You learn from it. Another long silence followed. This one carried something different. Not reconciliation. Acceptance. Eventually, Riley stood. She carefully placed every document back into the envelope. I won't ask for another chance. Ryan nodded. Thank you. I don't think I deserve one. He offered a small, sincere smile. That's probably the first thing we've agreed on in a while. She managed a quiet laugh through her tears. As she reached the front door, she paused. There was one thing I never understood. Ryan looked at her. Why did you keep driving that old truck? He smiled in exactly the same way he always had. Because every morning it reminded me that I never wanted my possessions to decide who I was. She nodded slowly. This time she understood completely. After she left, Ryan remained standing in the quiet hallway. He didn't feel victorious. He didn't feel vindicated. He simply felt lighter. His phone vibrated. Margaret Sullivan. They've completed the preliminary regulatory review, Ryan answered calmly. And Margaret's voice carried the same measured certainty it always had. They're preparing formal findings. The first official findings were released 3 weeks later. They did not arrive through television interviews or dramatic press conferences. They arrived the way most consequential decisions did, inside certified envelopes, through attorneys, across conference tables. Ryan read the summary in silence inside his office at Atlas headquarters. Margaret Sullivan sat across from him with a yellow legal pad filled with handwritten notes. Benjamin Carter stood beside the windows overlooking the Columbus skyline. No one interrupted Ryan while he finished. When he reached the final page, he closed the folder carefully. The language is measured. Margaret nodded. It was written that way intentionally. The preliminary findings did not accuse Preston Whitaker of fraud. They did not declare criminal conduct. Instead, they concluded that multiple financial representations submitted during lending negotiations required significant correction and additional regulatory review before any federally regulated institution could proceed with financing. The wording mattered, because the system Ryan respected did not rush to conclusions. It demanded evidence first. Victoria Chen joined the meeting a few minutes later. Our credit committee has reached its decision. Ryan looked toward her. The application declined. Benjamin asked quietly. Unanimous. Victoria nodded. Unanimous. She placed a thin folder on the table. The committee concluded that material inconsistencies prevented us from establishing the level of certainty required for a transaction of this size. Again, not punishment. Not emotion. Only standards. Ryan appreciated the distinction. Benjamin leaned back. So Riverside remains ours. For now, Ryan answered. Victoria smiled. I suspect it will remain yours considerably longer. The acquisition officially ended that afternoon. Whitaker Development Group withdrew its offer before additional regulatory questions could delay other business operations. The announcement received moderate attention across Ohio's financial media. Industry analysts described it as an unsuccessful negotiation complicated by financing concerns. Most articles focused on Atlas Industrial Systems. Many business reporters began asking the same question. Who exactly was Ryan Robinson? The answer frustrated them. There were almost no photographs, no television interviews, no social media accounts, no public speeches. One newspaper managed to obtain a single image. Ryan standing beside warehouse employees during a volunteer food drive nearly 4 years earlier. The caption simply read, Atlas founder Ryan Robinson. Nothing else. One television producer contacted Atlas requesting an exclusive interview. Benjamin forwarded the request. Ryan declined. The producer doubled the offer. Ryan declined again. A national business magazine proposed naming him one of the Midwest's most influential executives. He politely refused. Benjamin laughed after reading the email. You realize most CEOs dream about this. Ryan looked up from reviewing apprenticeship applications. I know. So, why refuse? Ryan closed the folder. Because tomorrow they'll ask who deserves to replace me. Benjamin smiled. You really don't enjoy attention. I enjoy accomplishing things. They aren't always the same. No, Ryan answered. They rarely are. Meanwhile, Preston's world had become noticeably quieter. Several investment partners postponed planned developments. Banks requested updated financial certifications. 2 major lenders initiated independent portfolio reviews. No projects were seized. No dramatic collapse occurred overnight. Instead, momentum slowly disappeared. Projects waiting for financing remained waiting. Potential investors became cautious. Future negotiations became longer. The consequences arrived gradually. Exactly the way real life often worked. One afternoon, David Monroe entered Preston's office carrying another stack of correspondence. The insurance company wants revised financial disclosures. Preston accepted the papers. Not for 2. The 3rd request this week. David nodded. People become careful after regulatory reviews. Preston looked through the office windows toward downtown Columbus. Months earlier, he had believed reputation alone could open almost any door. Now every door required documentation first. He quietly admitted something to himself that he had resisted for years. Ryan had been right. Evidence always outlasted confidence. Across town, Atlas officially completed another acquisition. Not Riverside, a smaller manufacturing technology company outside Cleveland. The signing ceremony lasted only 20 minutes. No photographers, no ribbon cutting, no celebration. Afterward, Ryan walked through the factory floor introducing himself to employees. He shook hands with machinists, engineers, maintenance technicians. He asked questions instead of giving speeches. One employee whispered to another, "Who's that?" "The owner." The machinist frowned. "He looks like maintenance." Ryan overheard them. He smiled. "I've been mistaken for maintenance before." Both men laughed nervously. Ryan laughed with them. "It usually means I'm dressed comfortably." The tension disappeared immediately. That afternoon, Atlas announced a new employee ownership initiative. Benjamin unveiled the program during a company-wide meeting. Beginning the following year, long-term employees would receive expanded profit-sharing opportunities through additional trust participation. Warehouse workers applauded, engineers applauded, administrative staff applauded. Ryan stood quietly near the back of the room. He preferred watching other people celebrate. Benjamin noticed him trying to leave before the meeting ended. "Not this time." Ryan looked confused. Benjamin walked onto the stage again. "There is one more thing." Employees looked toward him. "I've spent 7 years receiving credit that belongs to someone else." Ryan immediately shook his head. Benjamin ignored him. "Our founder has never wanted recognition." Laughter spread gently across the audience. "Which is exactly why he deserves it." Benjamin looked toward the back of the room. "Ryan." Hundreds of employees turned. Ryan remained standing where he was. Several newer employees looked surprised. They had seen him before, usually helping on warehouse visits, walking factory floors, eating lunch beside mechanics. They had never imagined he owned the company. The applause began slowly, then grew louder. Ryan walked reluctantly towards the front. Benjamin handed him the microphone. Ryan looked at the crowd, then smiled. "I appreciate this." The room became completely quiet. "But tomorrow morning," he paused, "please go back to treating me exactly the same." Laughter filled the auditorium. "I'm serious." More laughter. Ryan continued. "The company isn't successful because one person owns it." He looked around the room. "It's successful because thousands of people come to work every day and keep their promises." He handed the microphone back to Benjamin. "That's all." He stepped away before anyone could insist on a longer speech. Employees remained standing, not because Ryan demanded respect, because they wanted to give it. Late that evening, Ryan drove home in the same aging Ford pickup. The truck rattled slightly over railroad tracks, just as it always had. He smiled. Nothing important had changed. The phone rang. Margaret Sullivan. The court scheduled the final hearing. Ryan slowed for a red light. "When?" "Next Thursday." "And after that?" Margaret looked down at the notice. Everything should finally be resolved. Ryan thanked her and ended the call. Outside his windshield, the traffic light turned green. He eased the old truck forward. For the first time in many months, he realized he wasn't driving toward another confrontation. He was simply driving home. Thursday morning arrived with clear skies over Columbus. Ryan reached the federal courthouse 20 minutes early. Not because he expected surprises. Because punctuality had always been one of the simplest forms of respect. The courthouse itself was quiet. People often imagined important hearings unfolding before crowded galleries and television cameras. Reality was different. Lawyers carried briefcases. Court clerks pushed carts filled with files. Families waited nervously on wooden benches. Life continued, one case at a time. Margaret Sullivan met Ryan near the security checkpoint. "You've read everything," Ryan nodded. "Twice." "Questions?" "None." She smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." Inside courtroom 4, B. Judge Eleanor Brooks entered precisely at 9. Everyone stood. The judge acknowledged the room before taking her seat. "Good morning." The hearing began without ceremony. Counsel summarized months of document review. Bank representatives explained lending standards. Regulatory specialists described verification procedures. No one raised their voice. No one attempted dramatic speeches. Every conclusion pointed back to the same principle. Financial representations must accurately reflect supporting records. The court was not deciding whether Preston Whitaker had lived an admirable life, nor was it deciding whether Ryan Robinson deserved sympathy. It was deciding whether established legal standards had been followed. Ryan appreciated that distinction more than anything else. For nearly 2 hours, attorneys referenced exhibits already introduced during the regulatory review: certified financial statements, occupancy reports, email correspondence, independent audit summaries. Every document had already been authenticated. No one disputed the chain of custody. David Monroe addressed the court with professionalism. He acknowledged the inconsistencies. He argued that several reflected optimistic business assumptions rather than intentional deception. The judge listened carefully. She interrupted only to clarify dates or references. When David finished, Margaret Sullivan stood. She never mentioned Riley. She never mentioned the divorce. She never attempted to portray Ryan as a victim. Instead, she focused exclusively on documented facts. "The integrity of commercial lending depends upon accurate disclosures." She paused. "Nothing more. Nothing less." Judge Brooks reviewed her notes before speaking. "The court recognizes that commercial forecasting necessarily involves future expectations." She looked toward both legal teams. However, expectations must remain distinguishable from established facts. The courtroom remained completely silent. The evidence demonstrates that several submitted financial representations failed to maintain that distinction with sufficient clarity. She continued reading from the written opinion. Additional reporting requirements would be imposed. Certain lending certifications required correction before future federally regulated financing. Administrative penalties would follow according to applicable regulations. No criminal findings were issued. No dramatic condemnation filled the courtroom. Only measured legal consequences supported by documented evidence. Exactly as Ryan believed justice should work. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered along the sidewalk. Microphones appeared the moment attorneys exited the building. "Mr. Whitaker." "Any comment?" "Mr. Robinson." "Will Atlas pursue additional legal action?" Ryan stopped walking. Benjamin looked at him in surprise. "You don't have to answer." Ryan nodded politely toward the reporters. "I'll answer one question." The microphones immediately moved closer. A reporter from the Columbus Business Journal spoke first. "Do you feel vindicated today?" Ryan considered the question. Then he answered quietly, "No." The reporters exchanged confused looks. "No," Ryan shook his head. "I feel grateful." "For what?" "That the process worked," Another reporter stepped forward. "Do you have anything to say about Mr. Whitaker?" Ryan looked briefly toward the courthouse entrance. Preston was leaving with David Monroe. He appeared exhausted. Ryan turned back toward the microphones. "I hope his company recovers?" Several reporters looked surprised. "You do?" "I do." "After everything?" Ryan nodded. "The people who work for his company didn't create today's problems." He paused. "They still deserve jobs tomorrow." No one expected that answer. Another reporter raised her hand. "What lesson should business owners take from this?" Ryan smiled faintly. "Keep better records than your competitors." Laughter spread gently through the crowd. He continued, "And remember that reputation is built one honest document at a time." Without waiting for additional questions, Ryan thanked the reporters and walked toward the parking garage. Benjamin caught up beside him. "You know they'll quote that everywhere." Ryan unlocked the old Ford pickup. "They can quote the bookkeeping part," Benjamin laughed. "They'll probably quote all of it." As Ryan started the engine, his phone vibrated. Victoria Chen. "I just wanted to congratulate you." "For what?" "The acquisition." Ryan frowned slightly. "What acquisition?" "The board approved Riverside." Ryan smiled. "It already belonged to Atlas." Victoria laughed. "I suppose that's true." She continued, "The board also approved your employee ownership expansion." Ryan looked through the windshield. "Good. I thought you'd be more excited. I've been waiting for that decision longer than Riverside." Victoria understood immediately. Buildings generated headlines. Employees built companies. That afternoon, Atlas announced 3 major initiatives. The first expanded profit sharing across every full-time employee. The second created apprenticeship partnerships with community colleges throughout Ohio. The third established scholarships for children of warehouse workers, mechanics, and manufacturing employees pursuing engineering or technical degrees. Benjamin reviewed the announcement before publication. "You realize investors might ask why we're spending this much?" Ryan nodded. "We're investing. In people. The best investment we've ever made." The programs received overwhelming support. Warehouse supervisors emailed thank you messages. Parents wrote handwritten letters. Technical schools requested partnerships. Ryan read every letter personally. Several weeks later, he visited one of Atlas's newest apprenticeship facilities outside Dayton. Young technicians learned industrial automation beside experienced engineers. One apprentice approached him nervously. "Mr. Robinson?" Ryan smiled. "Yes." "I heard you started working in warehouses." "I did." The young man looked embarrassed. "My family says I should aim higher." Ryan glanced around the workshop. "I think you already are." The apprentice looked confused. Ryan pointed toward the training equipment. "Mastering useful work is never aiming low." The young man smiled. "I'll remember that." Ryan hoped he would. On the drive home, he stopped at a traffic light beside another pickup truck. The driver looked over. "Nice old Ford." Ryan laughed. "Still runs. That's all that matters." The light turned green. Both trucks continued down the road. Neither driver knew the other's profession. Neither cared. Ryan found something peaceful about that. That evening, he parked in his familiar driveway. The maple tree cast long shadows across the lawn. The porch light turned on automatically. He carried his lunch bag inside, set his keys on the same small table near the front door, prepared coffee for the next morning. His life looked almost exactly the way it had before everything changed, except now thousands of people knew who he was, and somehow, he still felt exactly the same. Autumn arrived quietly in Columbus. The maple tree in Ryan Robinson's front yard had turned shades of deep red and gold, scattering leaves across the same walkway Riley had crossed on the day she left. Every Saturday morning, Ryan still raked them into neat piles before the neighborhood children inevitably jumped into them. Some habits survived every season. At 5:15 a.m. every weekday, his alarm still rang. He still brewed coffee before sunrise. He still packed his own lunch, turkey sandwich, an apple, a bottle of water. His assistants at Atlas had tried more than once to arrange catered lunches for executive meetings. Ryan always thanked them, then quietly carried his own lunch bag anyway. He liked being reminded that discipline was built through ordinary choices repeated over many years. By 7 o'clock, the familiar Ford F-150 rolled out of the driveway. The truck had now crossed 170,000 miles. Its paint had faded slightly. The driver's seat showed visible wear. Benjamin Carter had once joked that replacing it would improve Atlas's public image. Ryan had laughed. "I don't think shareholders own my pickup." Benjamin never brought it up again. That morning, Ryan drove first to Mid-Ohio Freight Solutions before heading to Atlas headquarters. The warehouse looked exactly as it always had. Forklifts moved carefully between loading lanes. Drivers checked trailers. Dispatchers answered phones. Carl Henderson spotted him almost immediately. "You know something funny?" Ryan looked up from a delivery manifest. "What?" "We've got 3 new employees." "So, they had no idea who you were." Ryan smiled. "I suppose that's possible." Carl laughed. "They thought you were just another operations manager." Ryan folded the paperwork. "They weren't entirely wrong." Carl shook his head. "I still don't understand why you keep coming back here." Ryan looked across the warehouse floor. A young forklift operator was helping an older mechanic secure an oversized shipment. Neither expected applause. Neither expected recognition. They simply did their jobs well. Ryan nodded toward them. "That's why." Carl followed his gaze. "I don't get it." Ryan smiled. "That's where every boardroom decision eventually ends up." He pointed toward the loading dock. "If executives forget this place," he paused, "they eventually make bad decisions." Carl looked around the warehouse with new appreciation. "I never thought of it that way." Ryan placed the manifest back on the clipboard. "Most people don't." By mid-morning, Ryan arrived at Atlas headquarters. Employees greeted him naturally, not with exaggerated respect, not with nervousness. Exactly the way he had asked them to. An engineer stopped him in the hallway. "The robotics prototype is ready." "I'll come downstairs." A maintenance supervisor waved. "The new conveyor system passed inspection." "Excellent." A receptionist smiled. "Good morning, Mr. Robinson." "Morning, Emily." The conversations remained ordinary. That was precisely what Ryan wanted. He spent the afternoon walking through research laboratories instead of executive offices. Young software developers demonstrated warehouse optimization programs. Mechanical engineers explained automated pallet systems. Ryan asked questions, made notes, suggested improvements. One intern whispered to another, "I thought owners just stayed upstairs." Ryan overheard the comment. He smiled without turning around. "The upstairs people usually need the downstairs people." Both interns laughed. The nervousness disappeared immediately. Late that afternoon, Benjamin entered Ryan's office carrying an envelope. "This arrived for you." Ryan recognized the handwriting before opening it. "Riley." He read the short letter in silence. Benjamin waited. "No emergency." Ryan folded the paper carefully. "No." "What did she say?" Ryan looked out the window before answering. "She thanked me." Benjamin nodded. "And she accepted a position with a nonprofit workforce development organization." Benjamin smiled. "That sounds different." "It is." Ryan placed the letter inside his desk drawer. "She wrote that she's finally measuring success differently." Benjamin remained quiet for a moment. "Does that make you happy?" Ryan considered the question. "It gives me peace." Benjamin understood. Peace had always mattered more to Ryan than victory. Several weeks later, Atlas hosted its annual Employee Appreciation Day. Families toured manufacturing facilities. Children climbed into forklifts parked safely for demonstrations. Engineers explained robotics projects. Warehouse employees proudly introduced spouses and parents to coworkers. Ryan spent most of the afternoon serving hamburgers beside the maintenance department. An employee's 8-year-old son tugged gently on his sleeve. "Are you really the boss?" Ryan looked down and smiled. "I help." The boy frowned. "My dad says you own everything." Ryan laughed softly. "I definitely don't own everything." "What do you own?" Ryan looked around the crowded picnic, then answered honestly. "A responsibility." The child seemed confused. Ryan pointed toward the hundreds of employees enjoying lunch together. "My job is making sure these families still have work tomorrow." The boy thought for a moment. "That sounds like a lot." Ryan nodded. "It is. But it's worth it." Nearby, Benjamin watched the conversation without interrupting. Later, he walked over. "You just explained leadership better than most business schools." Ryan shrugged. "I answered a question." "Exactly." As evening approached, families gradually left the campus. Children waved goodbye. Employees thanked volunteers. Maintenance crews began folding tables. Ryan quietly helped stack chairs until one supervisor protested. "You don't have to do that." Ryan lifted another chair anyway. "I know." Benjamin laughed from across the room. "I've stopped trying to convince him." The supervisor smiled. "I guess some people never change." Benjamin looked toward Ryan. "I hope not." A month later, Atlas released its annual report. Revenue had reached another record. Employee retention stood among the highest in the industry. Safety performance had improved. Scholarship programs had expanded. The final page contained no photograph of Ryan, only a short statement. "Our greatest assets remain the people who keep their promises every day." Benjamin had asked whether Ryan wanted a message from the founder included. Ryan declined. The company didn't need another speech. It already had its direction. One crisp October evening, Ryan drove home along the same road he had traveled thousands of times before. The old Ford pickup hummed steadily beneath him. Traffic flowed peacefully through the suburbs. He stopped at a neighborhood grocery store to buy milk and bread. No one stared. No one asked for photographs. An elderly cashier smiled as she handed him the receipt. "Have a nice evening." "You too." She had no idea who he was. Ryan preferred it that way. As he pulled into his driveway, the porch light came on automatically. The maple leaves rustled in the cool evening breeze. He picked up his worn leather briefcase, the same one Riley had once given him years ago. It still carried faint scratches from countless warehouse floors and executive boardrooms alike. He unlocked the front door. The house was quiet. Not lonely. Peaceful. He set tomorrow's lunch container inside the refrigerator, prepared the coffee maker, hung his suit jacket neatly beside the door. Then he looked briefly through the kitchen window toward the backyard. The life he had built wasn't defined by the company he owned, or the wealth he possessed, or the respect others finally offered him. It was defined by something much simpler. He had never allowed success to change the man he chose to be before success arrived. Outside, another leaf drifted silently from the maple tree onto the front walkway. Tomorrow morning, Ryan would probably rake it away before sunrise, just as he always had. Some people spent their lives chasing the appearance of importance. Ryan Robinson had quietly spent his building something far more valuable. A life that never required anyone else's approval. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who never feel the need to prove how strong they are. Ryan never won because he had more money or because he found the perfect moment for revenge. He won because he stayed patient when others rushed, because he respected facts more than emotions, and because he trusted that truth could stand on its own. Quiet confidence often goes unnoticed until the day it becomes impossible to ignore. In everyday life, it's easy to judge people by their job titles, cars, clothes, or the attention they receive. But appearances rarely tell the whole story. Character is revealed through consistency, integrity, and the choices people make when no one is watching. Real success isn't about looking important. It's about becoming someone whose actions continue to earn respect long after first impressions fade. If this story made you think of a time when you underestimated someone, or when someone underestimated you, I would genuinely love to hear about it. Share your experience in the comments and let others learn from your story as well. And if you enjoy stories about quiet strength, patience, and justice that unfolds through truth rather than revenge, be sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's story explores another unforgettable journey where appearances hide a far deeper reality.